In the feature segment today, maple syrup. It's an annual spring rite that's grown into a business. Vermont is the nation's top producer. Josh Bittner of Market to Market says syrup making has modernized, but it's still hard work.
Our country's earliest sugar makers were firmly rooted in their craft well before Europeans arrived. But it was the union of native tradition and colonial technology which laid the groundwork for North America's enduring maple syrup production model.
Nowhere else in the whole world does the sugar maple tree grow naturally, and we don't plant it. Out of every 5 hardwood trees in New England, 2 of them is the sugar maple tree.
While much of the country turns the page on Old Man Winter, states like Maine, New York, and Vermont typically undergo an early spring freeze-thaw cycle, spawning a woodland sucrose infusion. With temperatures seesawing from overnight freeze to 40 or 50 degrees during the day, the tree's root system gains access to fresh water. Plant starches are nourished, kickstarting a saccharine windfall that lasts an average of 6 weeks with favorable weather. Once the sole means to an end, metal buckets still hang out in the rural Northeast this time of year. A reminder that the seeds of this sugar-coated culture were sown in nostalgic soil. Many producers opt to bring the forest to them by installing intricate networks of vacuum tubing.
They're not moving.
Roughly 10 taps feed a main line, which uses gravity-induced suction to expedite sap downhill for refinement. Tim Taft, a 4th-generation sugar maker, runs 650 lines on 100 acres of sugar bush, or forest, near Huntington, Vermont. And while tubing is a cost-effective way for the family operation to move raw liquid, maintaining an infrastructure that can be compromised by weather and wildlife requires constant vigilance.
So I'm just going to re-drive this spout and fix the problem. Mother Nature has her way of keeping us under control. This year we had a really bad snowstorm, lost power for 5 days, broke a lot of tree branches. Took us somewhere around 600 man-hours to clean up the branches that were all on our lines, holding our lines down in the snow.
Besides upkeep, several intensive procedures overlap in the journey from tree to barrel. Raw maple sap is approximately 98% water. But through a kind of sugar house alchemy, the balance of sucrose to water is flipped on its head.
This is a reverse osmosis machine to concentrate our sap from raw sap closer to syrup where it would be ready to go in our evaporator.
Boiling off excess water pushes the elixir's sugar content to nearly 70%. But 40 gallons of sap reduces to just 1 gallon of syrup.
Syrup last year that we sold was $2.60 a pound, and that's a pretty fair price.
Every spring, timber sugars off to transactions in over 20 states. And while the sweet stuff flows as far south as some portions of the heartland, the undisputed king of U.S. maple syrup production is Vermont. According to USDA, the Green Mountain State accounted for 40% of the over 3 million gallons of the nation's maple syrup in 2014.
It's a tens of millions of dollar enterprise. It employs an ever-increasing number of people. It's attracting all kinds of entrepreneurs. It's our fastest growing ag sector in the state of Vermont. It is probably the most valuable thing you can do with your land if you've got a good sugar bush to work with.
Farms like Taft, Milk, and Maple offer a textbook example of classic Vermont agriculture. Year-round dairies with seasonal sugaring operations. But some producers have abandoned the volatility of dairy to scale up on maple alone, despite weather uncertainties and short harvest windows. Brandon Family Maple Orchards are 7th-generation sugar makers who see larger opportunities for this variety of sweetener.
I think the future looks really bright. I think more people are understanding the benefits of maple. It's got a low glycemic index, so it breaks down in your body real slowly, and which is a lot better than other sugars that hype you up. So this is as natural as it gets.
According to the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association, an industry promotion group, antioxidant levels in maple syrup exceed those of raw cabbage, tomato, and cantaloupe, while the sticky substance's vitamin and mineral levels outweigh most comparable sugars. Maple fights an uphill battle for market share with sugarcane and sugar beets, but the syrup's arch nemesis could be the offshoot of one of America's largest cash crops.
You always got to read the label because sometimes it's false advertising.
Yeah, Aunt Jemima is not the most welcome person in Vermont, that's for sure.
On average, grocers stock more flavor-enhanced imposters than genuine maple syrup. And the disparity is attributed to price. Overabundant corn is simply cheaper and easier to produce.
That's really where our competition is. It's not New York State, it's not Maine, it's not Quebec. It's those corn syrups that people think of as maple syrup.
Maple advocates make their argument on quality, not price, touting the health benefits of pure product over highly processed food additives. But the American maple industry is somewhat accustomed to riding shotgun. While Vermont is the domestic leader, Canada, led by Quebec, rules the world in maple production, churning out 12 million gallons per year. The U.S. has worked with its northern neighbors in recent years to replace a convoluted American maple syrup grading system with a universal standard for both countries. According to the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, the province's market share has actually dropped over the past decade, from 80 to 72%, while the U.S.'s portion has increased from 16 to 23%.
Strategic reserve really helps us in Vermont because it really sets the floor for the price of syrup, and it has helped to stabilize the prices quite a bit.
Canada imposes legal quotas on producers and stockpiles surpluses in its strategic maple reserve in order to control supply and demand. Exchange rates offer competitors on both sides of the border advantages for moving product, but buyers value quality.
The big wholesalers will purchase syrup for a little bit more usually if it is Vermont or U.S. versus Canadian. But then the U.S. dollar versus Canadian dollar is also another big deal. And this year, with the U.S. dollar being stronger, it makes it more advantageous for them to go to Canada and buy syrup.
While several New England producers try their hand at retailing maple products themselves to control income and pricing, some of the commodity is repackaged in bulk for worldwide markets. Sealed in barrels, syrup will keep indefinitely, giving a little wiggle room to the laws of supply and demand.
If the market demand goes up and syrup gets short, they'll start to pay a little bit more for it.
But if the sweet smell of success doesn't boil over this year, America's maple sugar makers will try their luck tapping into revenue next season.
So now I'm going to drive it back in again.
For Market to Market, I'm Josh Bittner.
And you can watch this story again on maple syrup production on our Farmweek website. That's farmweek.msucares.com. You can also watch Farmweek stories on our Farmweek USA Facebook page and YouTube. You can also go to the Market to Market website where you can see the original story as well as read the script. We're also available at twitter.com/farmweek. And I'm ready to go get some pancakes.
Makes you hungry, though.
And some maple syrup. They go so well together.